Tonight in this podcast, I want you to picture a feeling.
Mm.
It's a very specific, deeply human feeling. And, if you've ever been in a long-term relationship, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
You're sitting in a quiet room. Maybe it's the living room couch, or maybe you're just sitting on the edge of your bed staring at the floorboards.
Right. Just kind of frozen.
Exactly. You've just had an argument with your partner.
Yeah.
And the echo of the raised voices, or I don't know, perhaps that suffocating weight of a heavy, angry silence, it's just still hanging in the air.
Yeah, you can almost feel the thickness of it in the room.
You really can. And the adrenaline that was flooding your system just moments ago, it's starting to fade.
Mm.
And as it drains away, it leaves behind this sudden sinking realization.
The drop.
The drop. It hits you right in the chest. You play the tape back in your head. The argument you just had, the exact words you used, the specific tone of voice, the way your partner sighed and walked out of the room.
Yeah.
It's the exact same argument your parents used to have.
Wow. Yeah, it is. It's a profound, almost visceral moment of recognition, isn't it?
It really is. It's terrifying.
It is. But what's interesting is there's no high drama in that realization.
Right.
Like, there are no sirens going off. It's just a very quiet, very solitary reflection on how our past secretly, almost invisibly, really dictates our present.
Yeah.
It's the moment you realize that despite all your promises to do things differently, you're walking in footsteps that were laid down before you were even born.
Exactly. And that feeling, that quiet realization that we are somehow playing out a script we didn't write, is exactly what we are decoding today.
Mm.
We are going on a deep dive into a really fascinating stack of research today. We're pulling from clinical psychology journals, the Gottman Institute, the pioneers of attachment theory, and family systems experts.
It's a heavy stack of data for sure.
It is. But I want to be very clear right from the start about our mission today. Our mission is not to call up our parents and cast blame.
No, not at all.
That is not why we're here. Our mission is to decode the unconscious blueprints we carry into our adult relationships. We want to finally understand why we love, why we fight, and why we distance ourselves the exact way we do.
And it is a crucial mission because, well, until we understand those blueprints, we often feel like we're just failing at relationships.
Right. We just think we're broken.
Exactly. We internalize that. We feel like we are inherently bad at communicating
Oh.
or, that we keep picking the wrong people by some stroke of terrible luck.
Like we're just cursed or something.
Yeah. We assume everyone else naturally knows how to do this and we're just broken. But the science, the deep psychological research we're going to look at today, it tells a completely different story.
Which is such a relief to hear.
It really is. It tells a story of adaptation, of survival, and of a brain that is simply doing what it was trained to do.
So let's start by painting a picture of what this actually looks like in real life. Before we get into the clinical terms, let's look at the human angle. The scene that plays out in millions of homes every single day.
The classic dynamic.
Right. In the clinical world, it's often called the pursuer-distancer dance. Let's imagine a couple. We'll use a case study drawn from the Gottman Institute research. A couple we'll call Deborah and Scott.
Okay, Deborah and Scott.
Picture them sitting on a couch in their living room. One partner, Deborah, is the pursuer. She is desperately seeking reassurance. When her partner pulls away even an inch, she doesn't just feel annoyed.
No, it's much deeper than that.
It's this intense, lonely ache in her chest. Her nervous system goes into absolute overdrive. She wants to talk it out. She wants to fix it, and she needs to fix it right now.
Right. And on the other end of the couch is Scott, the distancer.
Yeah.
When Deborah seeks that intense connection, when she leans in and demands that they resolve the issue, Scott doesn't feel loved or desired. He feels completely trapped.
Oh, man, just suffocated.
Literally suffocated. His heart rate spikes. He feels smothered, heavily criticized, and just overwhelmed by the sheer emotional demand of the moment.
So what does he do?
Well, his brain tells him to survive, and the only way to survive is to physically and emotionally retreat. She shuts down, he stares at the wall, and eventually he literally walks out of the ring to escape the interaction.
And both of them are in absolute agony.
Total agony.
Deborah feels completely abandoned, which terrifies her on an existential level, and Scott feels utterly inadequate and suffocated, which terrifies him. But this dynamic doesn't just happen during loud arguments.
No, not at all. It's often silent.
Yeah. You can feel it in the quiet moments, too. It's that feeling of walking on eggshells in your own home, constantly reading the room to see what kind of mood your partner is in.
Mm-hmm.
You become a meteorologist of your own living room, just trying to predict the weather.
That's a great way to put it.
Or, conversely, it's feeling a bizarre, anxious discomfort when a relationship is actually calm and peaceful. You know that feeling?
Oh, the dread of the quiet.
Yes. Where everything is fine and suddenly your brain is so wired to expect chaos that the peace actually feels like a threat. It feels like the calm before the storm.
That inability to tolerate peace is one of the most striking hallmarks of these invisible scripts. If your nervous system was calibrated in an environment where sudden shifts in mood were the norm, a stable, calm relationship actually triggers your threat response.
That is so wild.
It is. Your brain says, this is too quiet. I know how this works. The shoe is about to drop, and because I can't see the threat, I am in even more danger.
Which leads to this incredibly isolating internal monologue. If you're listening to this right now and nodding along, you've probably asked yourself this quote in the dark.
What question is that?
Why does it feel so uniquely isolating? Like everyone else got the secret rule book for being a normal, functioning adult in a relationship, and I was just absent that day.
Right.
You look around at other couples at dinner parties or walking in the park, and you assume everyone else naturally knows how to securely attach, how to fight fair, how to just, be.
But the truth is, the feeling of flying blind is not a personality flaw. It's not a moral failing. It's certainly not a lack of intelligence.
Thank goodness.
Right. It is the direct biological manifestation of an invisible script written decades ago during your formative years. It is a physiological and psychological response to your early environment.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
What exactly are we talking about here? Let's give this phenomenon a name so we can look at it under the microscope. We need to ground this in the vocabulary of psychology so we know exactly what we are dealing with.
In the psychological literature, we refer to this overarching concept as family of origin influence.
Okay, family of origin influence.
And it often results in a deeply ingrained psychological phenomenon known as repetition compulsion.
Repetition compulsion.
Right. But to truly understand this, we have to look at childhood differently. We have to look at it not just as a timeline of events, birthdays, holidays, going to school, but as a laboratory.
A laboratory.
Yes, your childhood home wasn't just where you grew up. It was where your brain built its internal working model of the world.
An internal working model. It sounds like a piece of software.
That is exactly the right way to think about it. It is essentially the baseline operating system you use to process human connection.
Wow.
According to John Bowlby, the pioneer of attachment theory, a child learns what love is, what safety is, and what to expect from other human beings based entirely on how their caregivers interact with them.
So it's all about that initial input.
Exactly. If your caregivers are responsive, if they soothe you when you cry, your working model writes a line of code that says, the world is safe, people are reliable, and I am inherently worthy of care.
Okay, but what if they aren't?
Well, if they're inconsistent, chaotic, or dismissive, your working model has to adapt to survive that specific localized environment.
Which leads us right into repetition compulsion. This is the unconscious tendency to gravitate toward relationships that resemble how our parents treated us or how they treated each other. We are drawn to the familiar, even if the familiar is deeply painful. Now, the old analogy is that it's like wearing tinted glasses, say blue tinted glasses your entire life, so you think the sky, the trees, and the ocean are all blue.
Right, the classic glasses analogy.
Yeah, you don't realize your vision is distorted until someone takes the glasses off. But honestly, I think that analogy falls a bit short.
Why that?
Because it only explains perspective. It doesn't explain the mechanism of why we actively choose the pain.
Exactly. The glasses analogy is way too passive. Repetition compulsion is an active driving force.
Right. So think about it more like the predictive text algorithm on your smartphone.
Oh, I like that.
When you first get a phone, it doesn't know your vocabulary. But over time, it learns what words you type most often. And here's the kicker.
Yeah.
If you consistently misspell a word, if you constantly make a specific typo, the algorithm learns the typo.
Oh, wow.
It assumes that the mistake is actually what you want. So eventually, even when you try to spell the word correctly, your phone autocorrects it back to the mistake.
It forces the error.
Exactly. It autocorrects to the dysfunction because that is the data it was trained on. Your brain does the exact same thing with relationships. It autocorrects your choices back to your childhood dysfunction because to your nervous system, familiarity is the only data it trusts.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The brain is an extraordinarily efficient prediction machine. We are not actively, consciously looking for partners who will hurt us. No one wants to be hurt.
Of course not.
But we are unconsciously scanning the room for partners who feel predictable, From an evolutionary standpoint, predictability equals safety. If I can predict my partner's behavior, I can survive it.
Even if the behavior is terrible.
Even if the predictable thing is emotional distance or constant criticism or sudden outbursts of anger, your primitive brain prefers that known danger over the terrifying unknown of a completely new dynamic.
So if you grew up in a home where love was conditional, right, where you had to
Yes.
earn your parents' affection by being absolutely perfect,
Mm-hmm.
then an adult partner who constantly moves the goalposts and makes you earn their love feels normal.
It feels like home.
Exactly. Your predictive text algorithm says, ah, yes, this is how love works. I know this spelling. You don't realize the algorithm is flawed until you hit a wall in your marriage and realize, wait, is love actually supposed to be this exhausting?
And understanding what this internal working model is leads us directly into understanding the hidden mathematical precision of how our brains enforce these patterns. Because this isn't just a vague philosophical concept.
Right.
We aren't just talking about feelings here.
Right.
This is observable empirical science.
So if we know this internal working model exists, how do we actually prove it isn't just a subjective feeling? How do we measure this in a lab?
Good question.
Because it's one thing to say we marry our parents, and it's another thing entirely to prove it scientifically.
Let's start with the foundational biology.
Yeah.
You mentioned John Bowlby, and our sources also dive deeply into Mary Ainsworth's attachment theory.
Right. Ainsworth.
Ainsworth didn't just look at behavior. She looked at how caregivers literally wire a child's nervous system.
Wire it. Like physically.
Functionally, yes. She showed us that if a primary caregiver is inconsistent, meaning sometimes they are incredibly warm and loving, but other times they're entirely checked out or angry, the child's nervous system wires itself for chronic anxiety.
Because they never know what's coming next.
Exactly. Because the child never knows which version of the parent they're going to get, their brain becomes hypervigilant. They're always scanning the horizon for signs of abandonment. This biological state of constant alert becomes the anxious attachment style.
And what about the opposite? What if the parent isn't inconsistent, but just consistently unavailable?
If a caregiver is consistently rejecting or emotionally cold, the child's brain makes a very grim but highly logical calculation.
Which is?
The child learns that seeking comfort actually results in more pain or rejection. So their nervous system completely shuts down the outward expression of that need.
They just turn it off.
They become fiercely, rigidly independent. They learn to self-soothe to an extreme degree. This biological adaptation becomes the avoidant attachment style.
Which brings us to some truly mind-bending research. Because this wiring doesn't just dictate how we feel, it dictates who we actually select as mates.
What's fascinating here is a landmark study conducted by researcher Glenn Gare. He set out to empirically test this exact phenomenon.
Okay.
He wanted to know, definitively, if we choose romantic partners who are similar to our opposite-sex parents. Now, Gare knew a fundamental truth about psychological research.
That people lie?
Well, yes, but more specifically, that people are highly unreliable narrators of their own lives.
Right. Our self-awareness is usually quite biased. I mean, if you hand me a clipboard and ask me, hey, does your husband act exactly like your dad? I am going to instinctively say absolutely not.
Of course you are.
Because I want to believe I am entirely independent in my choices.
Exactly. Self-reporting on something this deeply ingrained is almost useless. So Gare took the methodology a massive step further. He didn't just hand out a survey. He brought the participants into the lab and interviewed them extensively. Then, he brought in their romantic partners and assessed their personality traits using standardized psychological metrics.
Smart.
And this is the incredible part. He actually interviewed the parents, too.
He called their parents.
He really did.
That is incredible.
He gathered objective, standardized data from all three sides of the triangle: the participant, the partner, and the parent. He was looking for statistical correlations in specific personality traits.
And what did he find?
The results were remarkably robust. He proved that we do, in fact, choose partners with characteristics strikingly similar to our opposite-sex parents.
Wow. We really do.
We do. But here's the crucial nuance he discovered. If the similarities between the partner and the parent were positive, like warmth, reliability, or humor, the participant's relationship satisfaction was very high.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. You find someone kind like your mom, you're happy.
Right. But if the similarities were negative, like emotional unavailability, a hypercritical nature, or neuroticism, the participant's relationship satisfaction was extremely low. They were miserable.
Okay, so they hated it.
They did. But the attraction The magnetic pull to that person was still there. The statistical correlation remained.
So they chose them anyway.
They chose them anyway. It proved that this is a robust, observable mathematical phenomenon. It is not just a feeling of déjà vu. It is a measurable pattern of mate selection driven by that predictive text algorithm in the brain.
That is staggering. We are magnetically drawn to the traits that make us miserable simply because they are familiar.
It's hard to accept, but the data is there.
But the science goes even deeper. It gets even wilder when we look at how these attachment styles actually manipulate our own brains in real time.
Oh, yes.
I want to talk about Jeffrey A. Simpson's study on memory because this study completely blew my mind.
It is one of the most revealing studies on the power of the internal working model.
Let's walk through the methodology. Simpson's team brought couples into the lab and videotaped them discussing a significant conflict in their relationship, just a classic stressful disagreement.
Like finances, chores.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it was about finances, maybe about in-laws. They let them argue on camera. And right after the discussion, on day one, they separated the couples and asked each person to rate how supportive or emotionally distant they had been during the fight.
Standard procedure so far. They capture the baseline perception.
Right. But then they sent them home and waited a week. 7 days later, they brought the participants back in and asked them the exact same questions about that specific videotaped argument. And the results were terrifying.
They really were.
Their attachment styles had literally twisted their memory of the event. Specifically, avoidant partners who felt highly distressed during the conflict remembered themselves being far less supportive than they actually were on the objective videotape.
Let's pause and really consider the implications of that.
I mean, their internal working model, which is built on the core belief that says, I am distant, I am alone, I do not provide emotional support, and I do not receive it, actually overwrote the objective reality of the tape.
Yes, their defense mechanisms edited their memory to fit their narrative.
It's like their brain went into the archives, found a memory of them being slightly supportive, and said, nope, that doesn't fit our software code, delete that, rewrite it so we were cold and distant.
That is the raw power of the internal working model. It is not just a passive lens through which you see the world. It is an active, aggressive filter that alters your memories to ensure they confirm your core beliefs.
That is just, it's almost scary.
It is. If you fundamentally believe you are unsafe or unsupported, your brain will literally delete or distort memories of your partner being supportive because those positive memories contradict your survival code.
Yeah.
It is cognitive dissonance.
Right.
The brain would rather remember a negative event that fits its worldview than a positive event that shatters it.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. And honestly, this is the part of the research that I found the most perplexing.
Okay, lay it on me.
If you have an insecure attachment style, let's say you're highly avoidant, you don't like emotional intimacy, you pull away when things get deep, you value your fierce independence above all else, how do you ever attract a mate in the first place? Because consciously, everyone says they want a secure, loving, emotionally available partner. No one puts on their dating profile looking for someone who will emotionally stonewall me when I need them most.
It is a brilliant question. It is an evolutionary paradox. If avoidant traits are fundamentally destructive to pair bonding, why haven't they been selected out of the mating pool?
Exactly.
Researchers Claudia Brumbaugh and R. Chris Fraley asked exactly that question. How do insecurely attached people attract mates? What is their strategy?
Wait, hold on. Before you tell me the result, I just have to push back on this.
Sure.
Because it makes zero sense. If someone's core survival strategy is to avoid emotional connection, wouldn't they just be wallflowers? Wouldn't they just sit in the corner at a bar and never talk to anyone? Why would they even engage in the dating process if intimacy is their biggest fear?
Because human beings still have a biological drive to mate and form partnerships, even if their psychological software makes intimacy terrifying.
Okay, biology wins.
Always.
Oh.
So to bridge that gap, avoidant individuals develop an incredibly sophisticated set of behaviors.
Like what?
What Brumbaugh and Fraley discovered is that avoidant individuals are incredibly adept at mimicking intimacy in the early stages of dating.
Mimicking intimacy.
Yes. In their experiments, they set up dating scenarios and meticulously coded the physical behaviors of the participants. They found that avoidant individuals, despite fundamentally wanting to avoid emotional connection, actually use more eye contact and more physical touch than securely attached people during initial dating situations.
I'm sorry, you're telling me the person who hates intimacy uses more eye contact?
Yes.
How does that work?
because they are essentially putting on camouflage.
Camouflage.
They have learned that these physical signals, prolonged eye contact, touch on the arm, leaning in, are the currency of initial attraction. They deploy them effectively because they don't actually attach deep emotional weight to them in that moment. It is a performance.
That is fascinating. It's like they're playing the role of a secure partner.
Exactly. They also use humor very strategically. They use it to create a sense of shared connection, a feeling of we are on the same wavelength, which masterfully distracts from their essential aloofness.
Wow.
They project independence and strength, which is highly attractive in a prospective mate, and they mimic the signals of intimacy without actually offering any real emotional vulnerability.
That is kind of brilliant.
It is a highly effective, albeit unconscious, dating strategy. And it easily ropes in a partner, especially an anxiously attached partner who is desperate for those exact signals of connection.
But that leads me to a massive question. I think the listener is probably wondering this right now, sitting there trying to reconcile all this science with their own life.
What's the question?
If we consciously know our parents' relationship was flawed, if we know we don't want to be treated the way we were treated as kids, why does our brain mathematically drive us toward the exact same dynamic?
Yeah.
Why are we attracted to the very camouflage that masks the thing we know hurts us? If I know my dad was distant and I hated it, why am I falling for the guy making great eye contact who is secretly distant?
Because the brain prioritizes survival over happiness.
Survival over happiness.
Always. Happiness is a luxury. Survival is a mandate. Your brain knows how to survive the environment you grew up in. It has a deeply entrenched roadmap for it.
Okay.
It knows all the hidden traps. It knows how to navigate the arguments. It knows how to manage the disappointment.
Yeah.
If you grew up with a critical parent, your brain is a master at surviving criticism.
Right. You got the armor for it.
Exactly. So when you meet a critical partner, your nervous system says, I know how to do this. I have the instruction manual for this exact scenario.
The predictive text algorithm kicks in?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you meet someone who is completely unconditionally loving, emotionally available, and secure,
Yeah.
your brain panics.
It panics at safety.
It has no instruction manual for that. It feels unpredictable. You don't know the rules of engagement. And to the primitive brain, unpredictable means dangerous.
Wow.
Even if the predictable thing is painful, the brain chooses it because it knows it won't die from it.
It is so counterintuitive, but it makes complete, terrifying sense. We choose the devil we know.
We do.
Now, the science shows us these invisible forces at play, the attachment wiring, the memory distortion, the mate selection camouflage. But to truly understand them, we have to look at how these forces manifest in our everyday lives.
How it actually looks in the living room.
Exactly. How does this theoretical science actually look in our living rooms and our kitchens? Let's dive into the patterns. Let's look at the quiet ways these blueprints dictate our daily behavior.
Let's look at the real behavioral roles that emerge from these environments. David Lechner, a clinical social worker, outlines the specific roles children adopt in dysfunctional families just to survive the emotional ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And these roles don't vanish when you turn 18 and move out of the house.
Yep.
They become the exact blueprint for how you operate in your marriage, your workplace, and your friendships.
Let's name them and really look at the mechanics of how they work. First, there is the mascot.
The mascot, yes.
This is the kid who used humor to diffuse tension. When mom and dad were screaming in the kitchen, the mascot was the kid who cracked a joke or did something goofy to break the terrifying energy in the room.
Right.
But let's look at the neurology of that. When a child cracks a joke in a tense room and the adults laugh, it spikes dopamine in the child's brain, counteracting the massive flood of cortisol from the screaming. Humor becomes a literal chemical survival mechanism.
And as an adult, the mascot cannot handle serious emotional conversations with their partner.
Not at all.
The moment there is tension, the moment a partner says, we need to talk about our finances, or I feel disconnected from you, the mascot's brain registers a massive threat. The cortisol floods in.
And what's their learned survival mechanism? Dopamine through humor. So they deflect with a joke.
They make light of it. They physically, neurologically cannot sit in the discomfort of a serious relational issue because their brain is screaming at them to defuse the bomb.
Then you have the golden child. This is the child who traded their authentic self for conditional love.
That's a heavy trade.
It is. They realized early on that if they brought home perfect grades, if they excelled at sports, if they never caused a problem, the family chaos subsided momentarily and they were praised. They learned that their inherent worth is entirely dependent on their performance.
In adult relationships, the golden child is utterly terrified of making a mistake.
Terrified.
They cannot handle constructive criticism from a partner because a simple, benign comment like, hey, you forgot to take out the trash, doesn't register as a request about chores.
How does it register?
It translates in their highly sensitized nervous system to, you have failed to be perfect, you are flawed, and therefore you are entirely unlovable and about to be abandoned.
So they completely overreact.
They react with extreme defensiveness or a complete meltdown over something trivial because to them, it isn't trivial. It is an indictment of their right to exist.
And on the flip side of that, absorbing the darkest part of the family dynamic is the black sheep.
The scapegoat.
Right. This is the child who is scapegoated. The family projected all of their dysfunction onto this one kid. If only Tommy wasn't so difficult, our marriage would be fine.
Yeah.
If only Sarah didn't act out, we'd be a happy family.
As an adult, the black sheep internalizes that blame completely.
They just own it.
They enter romantic relationships already assuming they are the problem. If their partner is in a bad mood because of work, the black sheep assumes, what did I do wrong?
It's always their fault.
They accept incredibly poor treatment from partners because they fundamentally believe the narrative they were fed, that they are inherently bad, difficult to love, and deserve whatever scraps of affection they get.
Finally, there is the enabler.
The caretaker.
Yes, the child who learned to support and smooth over the dysfunctional behaviors instead of addressing them. They become the hypervigilant caretakers. They're the ones pouring the drunk parent into bed and cleaning up the mess before morning.
And as adults,
They often partner with individuals struggling with addiction, severe emotional issues, or irresponsibility. Why? Because their entire identity is built around managing someone else's chaos. They don't know who they are if they aren't fixing someone else. Peace makes them feel utterly useless.
and Milan and Kay Yerkovich take this behavioral mapping a step further with their concept of love style.
Love styles.
They identify specific ways we seek connection based on these early templates. They talk about the vacillator.
What does that look like?
This style comes from a home where connection was sporadic and unpredictable. Sometimes the parent was wonderful, warm, and present. Other times they were completely gone, distracted, or locked in their own issues.
Okay, so total inconsistency.
Right. So the child is always waiting, hypersensitive to any sign of rejection.
In a marriage, the vacillator is the one waiting for their spouse to prove they're emotionally available. They want deep, intense connection. But the minute the spouse gets distracted by work or looks at their phone or just wants to read a book, the vacillator feels completely abandoned.
And instead of saying, I miss you, they lash out with intense anger.
Exactly. They push the partner away as a defense mechanism, punishing them for the perceived abandonment.
The Yerkoviches also identify the controller and the victim. These styles often emerge from truly chaotic homes, where the parents weren't just unavailable, they were dangerous, or the source of severe chronic stress.
So it's a more extreme environment.
Yes. The controller survives childhood by vowing to never, ever be vulnerable again. Vulnerability led to pain, so they maintain rigid, absolute control over their environment, their finances, and their partner to ensure they are never caught off guard. They dictate the terms of the relationship entirely.
And the victim, conversely, survives by losing their voice. They learn that flying under the radar, making themselves invisible, and submitting to the chaos was the only way to stay safe.
In adulthood, they often find themselves married to controllers.
Perpetually recreating the dynamic of dominance and submission, they feel entirely powerless in their own lives.
Let's translate this into something highly relatable, a scenario that plays out away from the clinical extremes. Let's talk about emotion regulation in the kitchen.
Oh, this is so common.
In the research by Temmel and Dodd, they look at two primary strategies for handling emotions: cognitive reappraisal and expressive suppression. And the researcher Righetti specifically looked at what happens when we suppress our emotions during a sacrifice for our partner.
This is a scenario almost everyone has lived. I want you to picture this. Imagine you're exhausted, you've had a brutal day at work, your commute was awful, and you walk into the kitchen.
We've all been there.
The sink is completely full of dirty dishes. Your partner is sitting on the couch in the other room, happily watching TV.
Oh, no.
Now your internal alarm bells are ringing. You want to ask for help. But asking for help feels vulnerable. It risks a conflict. It risks them sighing or getting annoyed. So to survive the moment, You employ expressive suppression.
You swallow it.
You swallow your frustration. You physically bite your tongue. You walk over to the sink and you start doing the dishes yourself. You tell yourself you're making a sacrifice for the relationship. You're keeping the peace.
But Righetti's research shows exactly what happens next. Suppressing those emotions sours the sacrifice.
Sours it.
You are standing at the sink, scrubbing a plate, and in your head, you are silently tallying every single wrong your partner has ever committed since 2018.
Oh, the mental spreadsheet.
Yes, you are absolutely furious. You do nice things for your partner, but you secretly resent them for it because you have entirely repressed your own needs to do it.
And your partner sitting on the couch thinks everything is totally fine because the kitchen is getting clean and you haven't said a word.
But internally, you are building a massive, impenetrable wall of resentment brick by brick.
And that resentment inevitably leaks out. It doesn't just disappear. It leaks out in passive-aggressive comments the next morning. Or it results in a sudden, explosive argument over something completely trivial like the way they folded a towel 3 days later.
Because expressive suppression doesn't make the emotion evaporate.
Exactly. It just stores it in the basement of your psyche until the pressure is so high it blows the roof off the house. Cognitive reappraisal, on the other hand, is the healthy alternative.
Yes. Cognitive reappraisal is the ability to look at that sink of dirty dishes, feel the frustration, and process it in real time.
How so?
It is the ability to say, I am tired, and it is frustrating that my partner didn't notice this mess. But I also know they had a long day, and they aren't a mind reader. I'm going to walk into the living room and ask them to help me. Which requires vulnerability. It does. It risks a momentary friction.
Yeah.
But it entirely prevents the toxic buildup of resentment that destroys marriages over decades.
There is one more pattern mentioned in David Lechner's work that I found incredibly tragic, yet so quiet. We've talked about the big arguments, but this is about the quiet moments. It is the inability to play.
Yeah.
We're talking about adults from chaotic homes who literally do not know how to relax or have fun.
This is perhaps one of the most pervasive and least recognized symptoms of a chaotic childhood.
Let's use an example. It's that terrible feeling of sitting on a beautiful beach in Hawaii on a Tuesday afternoon. The sun is shining, the waves are crashing, you paid thousands of dollars to be there, and instead of relaxing, you're internally panicking because you haven't checked your work email in 2 hours. You feel this urgent, crawling need in your skin to constantly be doing something, to be producing something, to justify your existence. So you decide to aggressively reorganize your suitcase in the hotel room just to feel useful.
Because you don't know the rules of play.
Right. You don't know the rules of play because true play requires safety, and you never had safety.
That is the profound tragedy of a nervous system stuck in chronic survival mode. When you are a child in a dysfunctional home, your primary job, your full-time occupation, is threat detection.
You're on patrol.
You are a human radar dish, constantly spinning, looking for the next outburst, the next shift in mood, the next danger. You physically cannot turn the radar off to just sit on the floor and build a Lego castle or finger paint.
Because if you do, you get hurt.
Play requires a profound letting go of vigilance. If you let go of vigilance in a chaotic home, you miss the warning signs and you get hurt. So you never learn how to let go. As an adult, sitting on the beach on vacation feels inexplicably stressful because your brain is screaming, why is the radar off? We are exposed. Turn it back on. Find a problem to solve.
Which makes me think, it sounds like we build these massive, complex, intricate defense systems for a war that ended 20, 30, 40 years ago.
We do.
We build fortresses. But what happens when we use wartime defenses in a peacetime living room? We end up treating our spouse, who actually loves us and wants to connect with us, like an enemy combatant. We shoot them down because they breach the perimeter.
And seeing these patterns laid bare like this, recognizing yourself as the controller or the vacillator, or realizing you sour every single sacrifice you make by suppressing your needs, or realizing you can't even enjoy a vacation without reorganizing a suitcase, it can initially feel incredibly heavy.
It can.
It can feel like a devastating diagnosis. It can make you feel like you are fundamentally broken.
Which brings us to the most critical part of this entire deep dive. I want to pause here, because if you are listening to this right now and you recognize these behaviors in yourself, you probably feel a massive wave of shame.
Absolutely.
Shame is the heaviest thing we carry. If you constantly stonewall during arguments and walk out of the room like Scott, if you get intensely, overwhelmingly anxious when your partner just asks for an hour of space to read a book, if you're a relentless overfunctioner who takes on everyone else's problems so you don't have to look at your own, I need you to hear this very clearly.
Yeah.
This is not a flaw.
This raises an important question.
Right.
Why do we judge ourselves for surviving?
Right. Why do we?
We look at these behaviors as character defects. We view them as evidence that we are bad partners, bad people, or hopelessly broken, but they are not. From a biological and psychological standpoint, these patterns were brilliant, necessary, and incredibly effective adaptations. They were miracles of human engineering.
Exactly. Your brain did exactly what it was supposed to do. A child in a chaotic home had to become hyper-vigilant to survive the emotional landmines. If you didn't become a radar dish, you wouldn't have survived.
Sure.
The golden child had to be perfect to secure the basic parental care required to live. It wasn't vanity, it was survival. The avoidant child had to shut down their emotional needs because expressing them to an empty room led to unbearable, world-shattering pain. Shutting down was the only way to keep their small heart from breaking every single day.
You are not crazy.
No.
The software your brain wrote was an absolute masterpiece of survival engineering for that specific environment. It worked. It got you here. It kept you alive.
It really did.
What saved you then is simply hurting you now because the environment has changed, but the software hasn't updated. You are running a program designed to survive a burning building, but you are currently standing in a safe, quiet kitchen with a partner who loves you.
It's like wearing armor to a dinner party.
Yes, you are wearing a suit of armor to a dinner party.
Yeah.
It's heavy, it's clunky, and it keeps you from feeling the warmth of the room, but you put it on because you once lived in a war zone.
I really deeply want that to land for you, listening right now. You are not broken. You are human. Your nervous system is working perfectly. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is just referencing an outdated map.
That's all it is.
And once we strip away the shame, and we have to strip it away because shame keeps us locked in the cycle, once we realize we are just operating on old survival code, we can finally look up. We can take a deep breath and see how this code doesn't just affect our Tuesday night arguments over the dishes. It affects our entire legacy.
And that pulls us into the deeper connection here.
Yeah.
Because once we remove the shame, the question becomes, how do we move forward?
Right.
If healing isn't about blaming our parents and it isn't about hating ourselves, what is it actually about? This is where the work of Dr. Murray Bowen is profoundly illuminating.
Dr. Murray Bowen.
Yes. Bowen developed family systems theory, and his core concept for healing, the ultimate goal of all this work, is called the differentiation of self.
Okay, what does it mean in practical terms? Because usually when people realize their family was toxic or that their parents gave them terrible blueprints, their first instinct is to just cut everyone off.
Just run away.
Yeah, move across the country, block the phone numbers, skip Thanksgiving, and run. They think distance equals healing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Bowen argues that cutting off is just another form of emotional reactivity. It is the flip side of being completely enmeshed.
How so?
If you are entirely dependent on your family's approval, you are enmeshed. If you have to move 3,000 miles away and never speak to them just to feel safe, you are still being controlled by them. The fear is still dictating your actions.
Oh, wow.
True healing, true differentiation isn't about running away. It is the profound, incredibly difficult ability to remain in emotional contact with your family and your partner while maintaining your own autonomous identity.
So what does this all mean? Let's ground this in reality.
Yep.
It means you can go to Thanksgiving dinner, and when your mother makes that incredibly specific passive-aggressive comment about your career that usually sends you spiraling straight back into the black sheep role, you don't react.
You take the bait.
Right? You don't regress to being a defenseless 8-year-old desperate for her approval, and you don't explode in a rage and flip the table. You observe it. You feel the pull of the old script, but you don't read the line.
Exactly. You stay grounded in who you are now. You recognize it as her pattern, not your truth.
You are connected, but you are distinct.
Right.
You have boundaries that are permeable but strong. And this applies directly to romantic relationships, too.
Absolutely it does.
You can be close to your partner without losing yourself in their moods. If your partner comes home and is having a terrible day and they are being quiet and distant, a differentiated person doesn't immediately assume, they are leaving me, I must have done something wrong, my world is collapsing, I need to fix this instantly.
No. A differentiated person says, my partner's struggling today. I love them, I am here for them, but their mood is their mood, and my emotional stability is not dependent on fixing them.
Which connects to this broader, fascinating picture of how we form our identities within our families in the first place. There is a great piece of analysis by Dominus discussing sibling dynamics that perfectly illustrates this.
Sibling dynamics are fascinating.
Have you ever wondered how two siblings raised in the exact same house by the exact same parents, eating the exact same meals, can turn out so completely different?
Oh, all the time.
One is the rigid CEO controller, and the other is the bohemian mascot who lives in a van.
It comes down to two powerful, conflicting evolutionary imperatives. Dominus points out that siblings share 50% of their DNA. On one hand, they are bound by deep kin selection and loyalty. They are genetically wired to support each other and ensure the survival of their shared genetic material.
Okay, so they want to protect each other.
But on the other hand, they are hardwired for fierce differentiation. They are competing for the most vital, limited resource required for a child's survival: parental attention and care.
It is ecological niche partitioning, but in a living room.
Exactly.
So if your older sister figures out that being the straight golden child gets her the majority of the parental resources and praise, your developing brain realizes that niche is taken. You can't outcompete her in the perfection arena. The territory is claimed.
So you pivot.
So your brain subconsciously pivots to survive. You differentiate. You become the rebel or the star athlete or the comedian mascot, carving out your own entirely unique pathway to secure whatever parental attention is left over. We don't form our identities in a vacuum.
No, we don't.
We are genetically and psychologically forming our identities in direct reaction to the people sitting across the dinner table from us.
And that reactive identity formation, those specific survival scripts we write to navigate our siblings and parents, is passed down, which is why the work we are talking about today is so incredibly vital.
It's not just about us.
It is not just about having a slightly more peaceful marriage or fewer arguments about the dishwasher. According to extensive research from Peace Family Counseling, this is about intergenerational legacy.
Intergenerational.
They found that when just one generation does the hard, uncomfortable work to become aware of these patterns, to look at their internal working model, and to improve their emotional regulation and relational skills, the positive ripple effect is staggering.
How far does it go?
It positively influences up to 3 subsequent generations.
3 generations.
3 generations. By choosing to look at your own survival code, by choosing to update your internal working model from a baseline of fear to a baseline of security, you are literally changing the psychological trajectory of your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren.
Wow.
You are altering the predictive text algorithm for people who haven't even been born yet.
That is immense. It's heavy, but it is beautiful. It shows that an argument in the kitchen about who loaded the dishwasher wrong, or a sudden, inexplicable urge to push a loving partner away when they get too close, is never just about the present moment.
It is never just about the dishes.
It is about love, it is about trust and safety, and a deep, universally human yearning for belonging that started the day you were born.
As we draw this conversation to a close, let's just slow down and look at the ground we've covered today.
Let's do that.
We started with that heavy, sinking feeling in the living room, the quiet realization that we are caught in a cycle, arguing ghosts of the past. We defined the internal working model and repetition compulsion, the invisible predictive forces driving us toward the familiar.
The algorithm.
We looked at the hard science, the clinical studies of how our attachment styles can literally twist our memories to rewrite history, and how they dictate who we are magnetically attracted to.
We looked at the specific roles we played. The mascot, the golden child, the vacillator, the controller. We examined the way we suppress our emotions and sour our own sacrifices, building walls of resentment.
And most importantly, we reframed all of it.
We did. We recognized that these behaviors are not evidence that you are broken. They are empirical evidence that you survived. You adapted brilliantly to a difficult environment.
And finally, we looked at the power of differentiation, the profound ability to hold on to yourself while staying deeply connected to the people you love, and the profound 3-generation ripple effect that kind of healing creates in the world.
So as you go back to your day, whether you are driving in your car or making dinner or just sitting in that quiet room, I want to leave you with one thought to carry with you. We spend so much energy trying to avoid friction in our relationships. We view arguments or moments of distance or intense discomfort as signs of failure. We think it means the relationship is doomed.
But what if it isn't?
Exactly. What if the friction in your current relationship isn't a sign that the relationship is failing, but rather an invitation?
An invitation.
What if that exact point of friction, that specific thing that triggers your deepest anxiety or your strongest urge to run away, what if it is simply the exact place where your past is finally asking to be healed?
If this conversation felt true for you, if something in here landed, we would love for you to subscribe to Leone Patterns so you never miss what we explore next.
Leave a comment and tell us, what did this bring up for you? We read every single one.
We are building a community here, people who think about their past and their relationships differently, not as a flaw to fix, but as a human experience to understand.
You are not alone in this. And we are genuinely glad you are here at Leone Patterns. Same pace, same questions. See you then.